listening to CMajor here on CMajor Before the Show. It's a Saturday afternoon. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's podcast episode. We're talking about inversions, and it's a beautiful Saturday. A lot of people out and about. They're shopping, they're outside barbecuing with their families and having a good old time. A lot of people shopping today as well because there are a lot of semi-annual sales going on. And so I'm with you today because I want to share with you some information about inversions. What are chord inversions? That's what we're talking about today. And just to give you a heads up, if you happen to hear some background noise, it's because the people next door are having a good old time. Like I said, it's a beautiful Saturday afternoon. A lot of people celebrating the fact that the weather is good here in the tri-state area, the greater New York City area. So thank you so much for being with us today. We have a lot to talk about. And so, you've been following our discussion of chords. I mean, the basic way to play the chord would be this in a root position. So a C triad, for instance, would sound like that. An F triad would sound like this. A G triad would sound like this. And so I'm definitely at the piano today, so you may hear some piano noise as well, some clicking. But I wanted to be with you because I had a chance to help out with another recital, and I was very happy to do it. And so I have some music that I want to share. So it's part of CMajor's footnotes. But I think we're going to mix the footnotes in with the podcast. And try not to keep you too long today because it is lovely outside. I know you want to get outside and enjoy the weather. And while I'm on that subject, I know that for the summer months, a lot of you will be out and about, and you may not even have time to listen to the podcast the way that you normally would. So we're trying to think of a solution for that. Should we do shorter podcasts across the week, or should we still keep it long for the weekend and just hope that you're tuning in as you're driving and traveling and out and about? There's so many ways to listen to a podcast nowadays, and we're just grateful for the listeners that are out there and just learning all about how you do access the podcast and listen for yourself. I know personally I'm the type of person that wants to listen to a podcast from start to finish. That's just me. I want to hear what the whole vibe is for the person that is hosting the podcast, and then just to have a good sense of what they're aiming to do and see if I can vibe along with them. But here we are. We're talking about chords. And so you already know C chord, F chord, G chord, D chord, E chord, and an A chord. Okay, and then we talked about the minors, C, C minor, C, F, F minor, F, G, G minor, G, D, D minor, D, E, E minor, E, and A minor, A. And then you hear a song playing in the background that's Gut Feeling, and it was written in the key of A minor. I had a chance to work with a young student today, and I was helping her to understand how to play songs in major versus minor, and then mix it up and work on a song that was written in a minor key, but see where the changes are, where the song does change to major chords. And so that was very exciting for us to take a look at all of that. So thank you so much for being here. And so let's just jump right in. When you're inverting a chord, basically you can call it crawling from one chord to the next. So I'm playing on a C major chord in the middle of the piano today. Normally I would start lower, but I think if I just play in this higher frequency range, it's easier for you to hear what I'm trying to do. So now I'm literally going to crawl like a caterpillar. Now you're saying, why am I choosing a caterpillar instead of something else that crawls? Well, the caterpillar came to mind. You can think of other things that crawl. Worms, spiders, scorpions, I don't know. But we're going to pretend this caterpillar has shoes, and that this caterpillar is crawling from one place to the next, but trying to keep it all within the family. So if your chord is spelled CEG, for instance, then you can crawl like a spider over to EGC, and then keep crawling like a caterpillar over to GCE, and then keep crawling like a caterpillar over back to where you started, except now you're an octave higher on C, E, G. Did you follow that? I know I said spider instead of caterpillar, but I'm going to try to keep caterpillar in my vocabulary. I really want to use caterpillar as your visual today, as I'm finding that a lot of methods do. I think caterpillar is more friendly than spider, but anyway. Okay, now the cool thing about inversions is if you know how to play inversions, then you can play them in your left hand. So I was studying one of my textbooks from graduate school where we talked about chord tones and the jazz feel and individual tones. So in today's description of the podcast, you'll see that type of language. But where I first learned to play chord tones with my left hand was when I was swinging the bass. So just taking something as simple as going from root to inversion. If I'm playing a C triad, a C root followed by a C triad, but I'm playing an inversion of that triad. So if I'm going from a C to a G, C, E, okay, and then I'm just going back and forth. Let me turn up my sound a little bit so you can hear that. Okay, you might try that. It may be a little hard at first, but I think you can get it. And then do the same thing on F. And of course, if you're in CMajor's classroom, like CMajor's real classroom, like one-to-one private lesson learning, then I will show you how I'm doing it, and I can give you the fingering as well. But take this to your teacher, to your lesson studio, and see if your teacher can help you with this. Going from a C root to a C triad, but inverted. So we're going G, C, E, and then we're going from an F root to an F triad inverted. So now we're playing C, F, A, and then from G to an inverted G triad, which is spelled D, G, B. And you'll notice that on some of the resources that we've been using that they are already inverted. So if you're seeing a picture of that on the keyboard, the black and white key relationship will show you something that's inverted, right? And so it's fun. Okay, so I'm just going to do that for a moment. Okay, so it can seem a little hard to do that because you have to be really, really accurate. And then if you really want to have some fun with it, go ahead and play, and we've talked about this on this podcast, that old teachable melody that's been around for a long time now. I mean, it has its own history. I'll say it that way. But it really is a teachable melody and a teachable song. So it has its merit. So if you put that together. Okay, so even that gets a little tricky for me if I'm doing swing bass. I have to make sure I make the right change at the right place. And so even if you're studying something as fun as blues and jazz and improv, you'll know that you have to follow the written charts. You have to follow the lead sheets, and then you can create your own melodies. You can create your own rhythms and your own chords. So it's something as simple as this. I'm just going to go from a C to an F real quick. Okay, so what I did there was go from a C chord to an F chord, but I inverted it because it makes it so much easier just to go to that F when you invert it rather than jumping. You hear the difference? Okay, and then to go here, if I invert my F chord to C, F, A, it makes it easier to reach from C, E, G. So I hope you're following that. Okay, now let's go back to what I was talking about initially. So when I started the podcast today, I was talking about inverting your triads and crawling like a caterpillar. So literally, I'm going to crawl. Okay, so I'm playing C, E, G. I'm holding it down. Now I'm going to lift up on that C, and I'm going to keep holding down the E and the G, and now I'm going to crawl like a caterpillar that has shoes and put the C on the top. Okay, so now can you hear that? Okay, now I'm going to keep crawling like a caterpillar again. Okay, and then lift the E while holding down the G and the C, crawling over with the caterpillar, and then putting the E on the top. And now I'm going to keep holding this down but lifting up the G, crawling like a caterpillar again, and then ending back at the root, except now I'm an octave higher. So like I said, in the future we hope to have a visual to put with this and to have a whole program devoted to showing you what we've been doing all this time as we keep going with our chords series. Right now we're in the Chords for All series. We started out the series at the beginning of the year talking about chords for parents, and then now we're Chords for All, and then we'll keep going with chords, and I will announce the name of the next 12-week session as we go along. And so just to keep you informed and keep you with us, because we still want to keep using the language of chords to get you playing the piano and having some fun. So thank you so much for tuning in. Now, I do have some student shout outs. I have some other things that I need to share with you. And so I think what I'll do now is move into that area, and then we will bring you back to some of the pieces that I was able to play when I was asked to accompany some of those students. So let's just go now to my notes. And you know, it was a season of flowers. It was a season of recitals. It was a season of chocolates and bubble gum. So I'm going to leave you with that thought. I'm going to come back in a moment. You're listening to C Major Before the Show. And you are still here on C Major Before the Show. And like I was saying, it's a season of flowers and recitals and chocolates and bubblegum. I love bubblegum. I love chocolates. I love recitals. I love flowers. I love all of that. And so today's podcast lesson is about inversions. And what do you think you already know about inverting a chord or a triad? We've shared some information already about the way chords sometimes appear in the resources that are available for learning to play by chords and by ear. And so what we're talking about today is this and more on today's episode of C Major Before the Show. Now, I'll share with you at the top some information about chord inversions. We will continue to do that, but now I want to take a moment to give some student shout-outs, and I hope I don't leave anyone out, because there were a lot of shout-outs this week, really. I have a student that is on fire for the music of Beethoven, believe it or not, and she's a teenager. But because of the school that she's enrolled in, and I don't know if it's a private school, I'm not sure yet, but I know that that particular school does give information about classical composers, and she also plays in her school band. in the concert band. And so I want to give a shout out to her because she was so excited about Beethoven. You won't believe what she said. She actually used the word cool to describe Beethoven. And I was just floored when she said it. I thought, wow, that's amazing. Here in the 21st century, there are some teenagers that really think Beethoven is cool. And then she cited some of his music. She said, oh, he wrote the Ninth Symphony, and he wrote it when he was deaf. And, I just love playing Ode to Joy, and now I want to learn to play Fairy Elise. And she just started going on and on and on about Beethoven's music. And then she was telling me that she saw a documentary about Beethoven, and then she saw a movie about Beethoven. And so shout out to this student who's on fire for Beethoven. I think that's great. And then I have another shout out for another student. Now, she hasn't mentioned Beethoven yet. She's more into the music of Harry Potter. But she really floored me this week because she was talking about how excited she was to improvise and to make up her own music and create new melodies. And her own choice was to take her assignment, her homework, and turned it into her own. So she took music that she was supposed to be playing in her method book and said, you know what, on the repeat, I'm going to write my own melody. I'm going to create my own new melody. And she did it in a way that worked. So when I played the accompaniment with her, it actually fit very nicely. And then she has plans to do that again for the coming week. So shout out to that student. I just think that's great. I mean, she's young. She doesn't have to do that. She could be spending her time doing other things, but she is really starting to focus on her music. And I also have to give praise to her parents, too, because her parents did decide to invest in her music making and get her something that was very solid for helping her. That reminds me, I did see a video on YouTube about this genius, this prodigy. And it turns out in the video she was playing a clavinova. And so to know that my students are able to access the best musical instruments that are out there, whether they have a grand piano or a restored grand piano or top-of-the-line clavinova, the Maserati of digital pianos, in my opinion. I mean, it's just so encouraging to know they went from literally seeing just a keyboard and practicing on one of those fold-out keyboards, and then finally to grab the attention of their parents, their caretakers, to say, you know what, we want to invest in you, and we believe in your music making. So I think that's great. Now I have another shout-out for another student who is on the verge of becoming an artist. And a big shout out to her because she jumped through some loops, and it was with the encouragement of her parents that wanted to see her go from level to level, but basically at a fast pace. So you know how you can get into an accelerated version. I have a couple of students that are in accelerated methods, but this was very different. This was saying, you know what, if you put your mind to it, you can jump over some of the levels that have been presented to you, and let's go to the highest level possible. And the reasoning for that was that the student is very, very busy, as are most of my students. But I wish her the best. So she really took on the challenge and really challenged herself to go above and beyond her comfort zone. So shout out to that student. And just to let you know that I'm praying with you, not from just a religious standpoint, but I really do pray with you. And the student knows that she shared with me her beliefs. But I also believe in you as an artist, and I do from time to time. I just really say a prayer for my students, and I know that online you can even find examples of piano prayers that teachers have used for their recitals and their private studios. I've seen those, but this was just very different, just whispering some good thoughts for her and really believing that she could go as far as she wanted. Not every student has a chance to practice the way that they would like to, and the way that teachers envision that you would, and the way that I practiced growing up. So I didn't have perfect practice all the time, but I think you do what you can, and then you try to go as far as you can. But congratulations to all of these students so far, and how far you've come in your music making. I think that's great. Now, I have another shout out. It's not in my notes, but I did write it down as a reminder to shout out this student, because she really had me laughing, and it was because she plays recorder in her school, and so she found it's harder to play recorder than it is to play piano. Usually it's the reverse, that I'll have a student that says to me, I love playing my recorder or my pre-recorder, but I find piano challenging. She found the opposite, and she had a whole list of reasons why she thought playing the recorder was more difficult. So the song that she was going to be playing on her recorder was Amazing Grace. She had the sheet music, and she wanted to learn to play the same song on the piano. But she said, listen to me play this. And then she stopped and she looked at me. She said, I think I'm going to have an easier time playing this on the piano, because when you're playing a recorder, you have to breathe in right places. You have to put your fingers down in a way so that the sound comes out clear and that you don't squeak. And it's just so much involved. I'd much rather play this on the piano. So I love her spirit, and shout out to her. We're all inspired by your courage, and to anyone listening that needs some inspiration, these students will definitely give it to you. And so, not my student, but a flute performer playing Sonatina in B-flat by Telemann. I wanted to give a shout out to her because we had a last-minute rehearsal, and we pulled it off for a recent presentation of students that played wind instruments. And so she was a very busy student. She practices twice a week, she said, every 2 weeks for about an hour and a half each time. And so, in the words of her teacher, she crams it in. So, special thanks to her teacher, Lisa, for the opportunity to perform at this year's recital in Paramus, New Jersey. I really appreciate that. So, shout out to you both. So I'm going to be playing some of the music that I was able to use for that accompaniment, just so you can hear some of the inversions that we used. Because, again, when you're playing classical music, pretty much everything is fixed. There's no need to improvise. However, as I was looking on YouTube, I was saying that on YouTube that sometimes you get to see someone who's chosen to write a different version of the accompaniment. They've written out their version. That makes it easier for them to play along with the student. And they're using, of course, the same melody to create that. And then the rhythms and the chords stay in place. It's just that they're changing the accompaniment just a little bit. So I noticed that in one of the videos that I saw, that there were some slight changes, but it still worked out just fine. Now, before I start to play some inversions from the score that I used, I just want to say that on the CMajor radio show, we're going to go right into that this evening. That's new. Normally we wouldn't do that, but again, just in light of the weekend, in light of how beautiful the weather is and that you're busy and you're out and about and you're doing your thing, we're going to go into the CMajor radio show this evening and talk about inversions and how to write some of these inversions down that we're talking about now on the podcast. And then next week on CMajor before the show, we want to jump into our discussion of seventh chords. So I hope you'll stay with us to tune in next week as well. I think it may be our 8th week. I have a question mark by that because I know we're trying to count week by week, but we're definitely at the halfway mark for the course, for the Chords for All series. So thank you so much for for tuning in. And so another thing I want to say, if you have a chance to listen to an interview that I did, there's a very special episode, a special feature that was posted on today's broadcast. And so prior to this live broadcast, we were able to post an interview. So I'm going to say a little bit more about that as we close out the show. But let's jump in, and I'm going to pull out my score and play with you just some of the inversions so you can hear what we did over at CMajor's Footnotes over at the CMajor radio show last week. So I'll be back with you. I just want to take a little bit of a break, and I'll be back in a moment. CMajor on CMajor before the show. I'm back, and I just wanted to jump into some of the music that I had in my notebook. I put together a little notebook. Of some of the music I was expected to play when I accompanied the students in this last recital. So I'm putting on my music stand now. And I just want you to hear some of these inversions. So if you hear this, okay, can you hear some of the inversions? I mean, we're talking about a song that's written in the key of B flat. It's using a B flat chord, but it's not writing everything in root position. Okay, and they could have gone from 1 to 5 to 1 like that in the accompaniment, but they didn't. What they did was they inverted it so you can hear more of the B flat on the top, and then they inverted that, and then they broke up the chord, okay, staying on the B flat, and now going to your F chord, which is your 5, back to your 1, okay? So just the beginning of that. Let me just... Okay, so I hope you're able to hear that. So if you saw that, if they had written it out as a lead sheet, all I had to do was just go... probably for the first, 4 measures or so, and then, start going into other changes. But the way that they wrote it out, you can hear. Okay, so you hear they chose to end it on the first inversion of that B flat chord, and then keep the B flat in the bass. Now I know B flat is one of the chords that you learned recently. But it's just so interesting to see how it's written out. And then how would you change that if you were to accompany the same piece? So the flute part would go. Okay, so how would you do that? You would just stay on the B flat? You get to decide that. And so the composer of the piece, which I believe is Telemon, so this must be a transcription. I have to look it up, but it's interesting to see the way that it's written out. And then if I take a look at some of the other pieces, I posted it on CMajor's classroom as part of the homework. So I hope you were able to see that last week, just to take a listen to that. These songs are all accessible on YouTube, by the way. So all you have to do is just look up some teaching videos or some videos that were demonstrated by the teachers that wanted to have you take a look at this. Now, the first one that I played, again, is Sonatina in B flat, and it's by Telemon, I believe, and it's Allegro. So it's from a book of 4 sonatinas, and if I actually says sonata in B flat, I'm thinking sonatina, but maybe it's sonatina. I have to double check because I thought the book said sonatina. Maybe it says sonatas. I wasn't familiar with the piece, but I will take a closer look, and then if there's a correction to be made on the title, then I will make that correction over at CMajor's classroom. I was just given one sheet of paper that was scanned in as a photocopy, and then someone else took a photocopy of their phone and then gave it to me and said, hey, play this. And so I'm like, okay, let's just go with it. So that's how it is, the life of an accompanist, or I think what they call it nowadays, collaborative pianist. So it's just fun times. You have to be ready and prepared for everything. Now, the evening waltz that I posted over at CMajor's classroom, now this one is interesting. It happens to be in, my part happens to be in A flat. So we haven't talked about 7 chords, but this is great because it's just in time to talk about 7 chords. So just because you play a 7 chord in root position doesn't mean that it's going to show up that way in an accompaniment part. So here, the way it's laid out, you have a 7th chord going to the home chord, which is A flat, and then you're just kind of toggling back and forth. Okay, so we may come back to this because I think it's a great example of what you can do with 7 chords in your writing. So I practice this with the intention of playing it, and was asked to hold off because some of the students were more comfortable playing either with their recorded version or just as solo. And I think that's true, unless you have time to really work on the tempo and the rehearsal and make sure everything's in place. You really need to be careful because you don't want anyone to get nervous based on how you've played it in your own practice and then how they've played it, and then you come together and there's a clash. So that's okay. It's just nice to be prepared. But if anybody wants to play this in the future, I have the scores ready and I'm ready to accompany and would enjoy doing it. So I may even decide to do an announcement about that. We'll see. Now, this next one is very fun because it uses very thick chords, and it's called Minuet. It's by Mozart, and so this is written for saxophone and piano, and the saxophonist, if you want to say it that way, the saxophonist ended up playing it as a solo piece. But just listen to the beginning chords. Okay, so. Okay, doesn't that sound really exciting? And so it's because of the way that the chords are printed. So in the left hand, okay, and you can definitely hear that it's minor. So you'll see the key signature if you're into key signatures. Actually, we discuss key signatures more of it at CMajor, at the CMajor radio show. But, the relative minor to A flat is F minor. Okay, so that's what we're dealing with here. And then you have this fun thing with the descending octaves. Okay, everything descending by semitones or half steps. And then in the right hand you have... Okay, so that's all inversions, which I loved playing. So to put that together with the left hand was very exciting for me. It's just like, oh, I hope I get to play this one. Now, the soloist played it at a tempo that I would say was somewhere between 120 and above. So for Allegro moderato, I rehearsed it at 116 to 120 with the quarter note receiving the beat, but it sounded like it went faster. So again, we're talking about fun things you can do with inversions. And then if you have a chance to look at the trio part of the minuet, because you definitely can see and hear what's going on with the inversions there. They go to F major. So they go from the relative minor, F minor, and then just decide to go to F major. And then they go back to F minor for the minuet part of it. So, okay, so instead of playing, just a root chord for the F chord, they invert it. And you can see they've chosen to play the second inversion in the accompaniment. Okay, so moving on, we had this other exciting, now this was a sonatina. It was a sonatina based on a trio, based on Trio 5. Sonatina based on Trio 5 by Haydn, and then it was transcribed. So if you need more information about that, just let me know. These are very old school pieces, and the teacher is choosing to use these pieces with his students, which I think is great. And so this one was more traditional, I would say, for classical pieces. So, you had more you had more of that type of, But it was fun to hear, the soloist go through that. So, it was a lot more finger work. So, the teacher showed it to me that, oh, well, I don't know if my student really wants to play with the accompaniment live today. It's a lot involved. So it would have been fun to play it. But again, there's always another time to play it. And so, again, for piano and saxophone. And then let's go to the last piece. Now, this piece is played by the saxophone teacher himself, who also plays, woodwind instruments other than saxophone. So he plays clarinet, he also plays flute, and just a really, really solid teacher. It was really nice to see how he wanted to demonstrate for his students what would happen if you played live with a recording. And so I think that was a really great lesson. So while the students were able to play solo without a live accompanist, they had been practicing with a recording, to have the teacher say, you know what, and finally I'm going to show you what it's like to play with a recording. And then he was able to give them a big lesson on that. Now, if you care to look this up and listen to it, listen to see if you can hear any inversions. So they're all over the place in this piece. And it's Largo and Allegro from Sonata 6 by Handel. And so, again, if you have any questions about any of the pieces that we share, please let me know. And that's pretty much it for CMajor's Footnotes. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And I just want to encourage you to, whatever you do, try to get out and make some music. Make the best music that you can make, because you never know where music making will take place. We live in the greater New York City area, and there's always something going on, in terms of music making, whether it's something going on in Central Park, whether it's something going on at Lincoln Center, or something going on at Carnegie Hall. And that's the thing that I love most about being in the greater New York City area. Although I have friends that are looking to spend time in the Midwest for summer, because they're looking into other types of music making that have to do with a DJ. So we posted some of that music here too. So if you happen to be into the music that DJs play and you like listening to the mixologists that are out there, just know that there's appreciation out there for all types of music making. There are just millions of ways to enjoy music, but make the best music that you can make. We live in an era now where you can play an acoustic instrument. You can also reach out and make music the digital way, and we're just excited about all of it. So I encourage you to do whatever makes you the most excited when it comes to music making. And so here in our Chords for All series, we invite you, I'm talking to you listening to this podcast right now. You are invited. You personally are invited to listen in, to tune in, to turn us on here on the Spreaker platform and listen to what we have to say about 7 chords. I want to see all of you, and I want you sharing this with your friends and your family. Let them know what you're interested in, because they're not going to know unless you let them know. Say, hey, you know what? There's this podcast that's talking about chords, and I don't really understand all of it, but I think I want to try to play by chords and by ear, and to learn from the podcast. And you may be surprised at the reaction that you get. Or you may decide to go the traditional route. Maybe after listening to the podcast, you say, you know what, I think I want to get myself to a studio and learn that way too. Whatever your choice is, we just want you excited about music making. It doesn't have to be just a hobby. You may be an IT professional. You may be a financial planner. You may be someone that works in corporate finance. You may be someone that works in the restaurant business. You may be someone that is a barista. It doesn't matter. Find your voice for making music and make the best music you can make. That's our advice here on CMajor Before the Show. It's been a great pleasure to be with you, and we hope to see you next week right here. Take care. Have a great evening and a great weekend.